Welcome back to the smoke-filled room. We're on episode 24, and this is at the end of the first week of veto session. So we have a special guest with us, Ed Sullivan, former state representative, former township assessor, now one of those dirty lobbyists that everyone says is the problem down in the swamp in Springfield. But no one's going to have a better idea of what's happening, not just what you see in the news, but behind closed doors. So Ed, thank you for joining us. Glad to have you here to talk through what's actually happening down in Springfield. For those who don't follow it as closely, there are 2 weeks of veto session. We just completed the first week. There's a week off, and then the lawmakers go back down to Springfield for the second week of veto session. Oftentimes, a lot of the action that happens in veto session will happen in the second week. So a lot of the information we have for you right now is going to be a preview of what we heard this week and what that means for what's actually going to happen when things happen in the final week of veto session, because as Ed knows from when he was a lawmaker, nothing really happens in Springfield until there's a deadline. So
correct.
That's why it's got to be the last week of veto session when stuff gets done. All right, I just want to start here. Ed, you just got back from Springfield. We're recording this on Thursday. What are your overall takeaways of what you saw in this first week of veto session that people should be aware of?
Well, it really was a lot of running around to do absolutely nothing quickly. Is the best way I can put it. A lot of discussions, a lot of caucus meetings to try and decide which direction we're going based on some of the ideas that are out there. But I guess the best way I can describe the first week is there just really wasn't the temperature to get a lot done right now. Some of that is legislation isn't ready. Some of it is they're not quite sure what to do on some really high-profile issues that that we know and are out in the stratosphere right now.
Well, what I've been hearing too is the timing of with the primaries coming up, and so candidates need to file for office in just a month. And so there's a lot of these lawmakers that are nervous about catching a primary challenge on some of these issues too, right?
Sure. What you're also seeing is a lot of bills being dumped all of a sudden. You know, someone says, "Oh, I got someone coming up as a primary." Well, I might want to, if you're on the Republican side and you have someone from your right or your left, you know, you want to put in legislation that says, "I'm really strong on this issue." And so we're seeing it on both sides. And so that also reflects into, do they want to do anything? Do they want to take a vote that might cost them a primary because they still have time? Or do they want to take a vote where if they already have someone maybe going to file that it can be used against them?
So what you're saying is if we wanted good government in Illinois, they probably should adjust the timing of filing in veto session so veto session didn't happen right around the filing deadline?
Yeah, I mean, this is all political right now. There's no doubt about it.
All right, well, let's get into some of the things that happened, that didn't happen. There were some hot button issues. One of the biggest things we've been hearing a lot about is the Invest in Kids private scholarships. They're due to end. The program is due to end at the end of the year. It really was the biggest thing that got a lot of attention leading into veto session.
Sure.
It looks like it seems to have run into multiple brick walls, at least this week. Where does that stand, and what are you hearing about Invest in Kids?
So Invest in Kids was a Rauner initiative that sunsets in January of 2024. And it's running in multiple places on the Republican side and on the Democrat side. Basically, it's this. Unions don't want to take government money and put it into scholarships to private schools, in essence. That's the theory behind it. And so anything they can do to kill that program off, they're going to do. Now, it's supposed to sunset. We're trying to expand it. The initiative right now is to 2029, scale it back a little bit. And the unions basically, Illinois Federation of Teachers actually threatened the governor over this issue.
Yeah, but I've got the quote here because I don't want to get it wrong.
Okay.
You can't align yourself with right-wing Republicans like Abbott and DeSantis and still hold democratic values, is what the IFT said about Pritzker. Yeah.
Right. Well, and they don't realize that what has happened in Florida, whether you like DeSantis or not, because this has taken place a decade before he was in office, it's been a hugely successful program in lifting up communities of color. And that's the point of the program. Now, could they do some things? And that's kind of what they're talking about right now, is how do we shift more money to minority communities where it really should take place? That's the discussion, and that's what's leading up to what's going on right now.
Well, that's what proponents will say, and it's funny, you can see those opponents of it try to point to the fact that they say it's not going into those lower income communities, into communities of color, and then those of most need. But you look at the demographics of the state of Illinois, we've covered this a few weeks ago, and the demographics of who this program is helping currently, without even changes to improve in their minds, and it's already helping more young black families, black students, Hispanic students, fewer in the Asian community, though from an educational standpoint, they don't tend to need that assistance as much. but it is already going more into those black and brown communities already, and now
Right.
the people behind the program are talking about making changes to ramp that up even more.
Correct.
But it's negotiating with terrorists. I mean, at the end of the day, you said it. The IFT especially is, we don't want this at all. I don't care how much it helps
Correct.
those of need and communities of color. I tend to, tell me if I'm crazy, I tend to see IEA tends to be a little bit more balanced in the way they approach things. IFT is sort of that hardline group typically.
Yes, and then you add CTU into the mix, and you really see two sides that are going to be opposed to this no matter what. IEA has historically been more of the moderate union that likes to try and get things done, get it negotiated, so we see that quite a bit. But when I was in the General Assembly, I was the lead Republican sponsor of the School Choice Act, and we saw it back then where the unions came out so hard against it. And back then we were talking about a program that would have lifted up the bottom 10% of public schools that had been the bottom 10% of public schools for over a decade. And they still couldn't, do anything to help that out. And so that's what they're fighting. But now we're seeing that the Republicans on the, I guess you would call them the more conservative Republicans.
The Freedom Caucus?
The Freedom Caucus has come out and said, well, we don't want it at all. They don't want the compromise because they wanted everything that should take place. They want this permanent. They want
all
more
or
money.
Yeah.
So it's an all or nothing. And are they right? Are they wrong? I don't want to say they're wrong because it's such a good program, but at the same time, without your votes, it's not going to pass.
Right. Well, and let's talk about that because they have come out strongly saying that they're against this compromise, and one of two things could be happening. If these were people who were experienced at winning, which this group doesn't tend to win very often, but if these are people who were strategically smart and typically showing that they could win, it's not a bad thing to anchor the position on the right over here, because IFT has anchored the position on the left, and now you can come to a better compromise.
Right.
If that's what they're doing, then I will give them kudos in 2 weeks if that's what ends up happening. Unfortunately, our experience with the Freedom Caucus is not that they're thinking strategically like that, it's that they truly mean it, that they're not going to put a single vote to this unless they get everything that they want. If that's the case, they may have single-handedly just killed the whole dang thing. So I don't want to assume I know their intent, because I don't. If they're
Sure.
trying to anchor this so that the compromise ends up being a better compromise, then kudos to them.
Sure.
I think people could understand when I just assume that's not actually what's happening, because it doesn't tend to be what they do. But if that is their goal, then maybe that does help the process.
Well, the issue is you're going to need 90% of the Republicans to vote for it,
Yep.
and then still look for votes on the Democrat side.
Yep.
That's what they're fighting right now. Without their votes, it just is not going to pass.
Well, what we've been watching in D.C. for the last
Yeah,
several weeks
right.
is this does not be a group of people who say, okay, let's anchor ourselves, but then come to whatever that compromise is. They just say, listen, it's like negotiating with terrorists on our side. It's the same deal. If I don't get what I want, I'm going to take my ball and go home. But at the end of the day, then I think no one can be held more responsible for these young, low-income, often minority students who need help, who aren't going to get help, thanks to a bunch of people who said, all or nothing, I'm going to go home.
That's precisely what's happening right now. Yeah. It's
All right,
unfortunate.
so what's your temperature on, does something happen, or does this just wind down when we get back to veto session?
I don't see a path forward if the Republicans decide that they are going to hold true and they don't get a change. Maybe something comes out and they can, say, oh, well, we got to change, and then they vote for it. Because my discussions with Democrat legislators is they don't have the votes on their side yet, and so here we are.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. It's a
Well,
good program.
the subtext of this, or the subtitle of this, is yet another issue, controversial issue that Pritzker just punts and says, not my problem.
Correct.
I don't know if we've ever seen a governor like this who never takes a stand on anything controversial.
And to some degree, I'll give him credit for standing up and saying, I'm for the compromise. I mean, I got to give him credit where credit is due. But you're right, he's not
He didn't
going.
really say he was for the compromise. He just said, if you all get your shit together,
Yeah,
I'll sign.
I'll sign it.
That's all he said.
I said
If he
it.
does come out and say, I do like this compromise, then I'll change my tune and I will give Pritzker credit, which I have to throw up in my mouth a little bit when I do it, but I'll do it. But that's not what he did. He just punted.
Well, we'll see what he does. I don't see him putting any effort into talking to people at this point.
Well, and Ed has to actually be able to go down and lobby still, and he needs the governor's people, so
Yeah.
I can be a little meaner to the governor than Ed can. Anybody have thoughts on this, or we're going to move to the next topic? You guys all good? Chris always has thoughts. Come on, buddy.
I mean, I think your assessment of the Eastern Bloc would be accurate, where they're trying to anchor the position. If there was more Republicans to anchor with, there's not. If there was more Republicans in the House who can make a more united front to say we want, X, Y, and Z provisions in this bill, it would make sense. But because the Republicans are in a super minority, I'm not sure how much that's going to matter. But what does matter is that they need to get behind this compromise bill. And if they don't, if they're the reason this sinks, because I can think off the top of my head, I can think of a number of Democratic legislatures who represent areas that would benefit from the Invest in Kids Act for one reason or another. I can think they can probably get these votes in some way or another. But if it's the Republicans, if it's the Eastern Bloc thinking this, I'm going to be very upset.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. But I'm with you. I hope they're not the ones who end up killing this. We'll wait and see. Next, let's talk about the Nuke bill. Because Pritzker vetoed the Nuke bill. He talked about negotiating with terrorists. He bowed to the environmental terrorists that he has to deal with who say, we want no carbon and we're not going to actually let you do anything to get to a world where there is no carbon. So I don't know how the heck we're supposed to get there without actually having some form of nuclear energy in this state, but that's why I'm not an expert on this. Anyways, Rezin claims she's got the override vote for this. She also filed another bill just in case she can't override Pritzker's veto. What are you hearing about this? Is this going to move in the final week of veto session?
Yeah, not a lot being discussed on this. Once again, you have environmental groups, multiple groups that, to the life of me, I don't understand why want to end nuclear power. It doesn't make any sense, especially when you're really scaling back on coal and all the other things that take place, and you can't bring up to speed the other alternative power that you want to bring up. It doesn't make any sense that you wouldn't have an alternate, and especially an alternate that really makes sense. And so we've heard she has the votes. She obviously had the votes when she passed it the last time. At this point, it's in Speaker Welch's court. He has to make a decision, do I want to move forward or do I not? And what we've heard is, all right, well, let's see what happens in the Senate. So if she passes it out of the Senate, and then he'll make that decision. I don't have inside information on this, but I would say she probably will, and then put it in his court. Yeah. That's what I would do.
I'd imagine she gets it to the Senate. The question is, does Welch call it? We talked about a couple months ago on this issue, because Welch came out and basically said he was going to give the governor cover on this.
Right.
And so, no one has to put a vote to it if Welch just never even calls it. And that's often what they'll do to kill a bill.
Sure. But how bad are the unions going to come out and say, if it gets over, hey, you have to call this? Because remember, they're losing out on the Ameren bill, because that's not going to get called. So not that these
and they're
are
unhappy
linked.
About carbon capture and where that's not going in the
They're
state.
unhappy on a whole bunch of things, and this is big jobs to build these things, and so they'd really like to have it moving forward. So I put the onus on, can the unions get to the speaker to say, hey, we really need this bill?
It does seem like that's where this is at. It seems like that's where the fight will be in the final week, is can the unions convince Welch to call this thing, which is an interesting place to be because there was a lot of news coverage in Pritzker's first administration, his first term, that the unions got whatever they wanted. And that was pretty much the reality. Maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, but you were down there. They got pretty much whatever they wanted. It seems like the last 18 months or so, that has not been the reality. And maybe it's just because Pritzker's thinking national now versus thinking state. But it is interesting to see how a bunch of people in these unions who got whatever they wanted are now getting very little of what they want. And they're rightfully not super happy about it.
Right. Well, I said way back in 2010 on the rewrite of, I think it was 2010, on the rewrite of the election code, campaign disclosure code, when they said, all right, we're going to have from one entity, it could be up to $57,000, that, all right, well, the only ones that can come up with that type of money are unions. And they have used their political might very well. They've gotten a lot. And some of it I like, some of it maybe I don't like, but that's where they're at. And so it really comes to them if they can convince them. But yes, they've had a very good couple years, for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. We'll be watching that fight, so keep an eye on Welch and the unions.
Right.
All right, let's go to the next one. We can move along this agenda here. So you mentioned Ameren. Let's talk about that. There was a bill called the right of first refusal for Ameren for downstate power lines. Looks like the proponents have said, we're not going to happen in veto session. We're going to work to maybe pass this next session. What are you hearing about that?
Well, so my good friend Larry Walsh, who's the chairman of Public Utilities, he was the chairman when I was the minority spokesman of Public Utilities. This is really simple. If you want to have all these new alternative energy come online, you need a way to move it around the state. Well, you need to build transmission lines, and that's going to have to happen.
And I hear a lot of these lines.
Oh, billions. And so the unions are correct that they want to make sure that we build these Illinois workers are building these as they come online. And so this first right of refusal is to say your incumbent unions will, or companies will build these, and then after that, people can bid on them. Some of the problem is this bill was an Ameren only bill, and so that caused some issues with other companies that potentially could build them. They said that it was only because it's down in Southern Illinois in the MISO region that's why they wanted to do it.
Mostly it's because they didn't want to have the ComEd part they had to deal with, right?
Yeah, it is, but
But you have a bill that impacts just one part of the state. Why would legislators in the other part of the state take a controversial stance to help you out?
Correct, and so you see if they try to override this, they didn't have the votes. And so just recently, yesterday, Welsh came out and said, yeah, we're going to educate everybody and move forward next year with a new bill. We also saw the unions come out and say similarly the same thing, maybe a little bit heated language because they're not going to be building this. But more importantly, and I think it's good that the Ameren CEO, the new CEO, Singh, came out and said, here are the reasons why right of first refusal is what we should have.
Because on paper it looks weird. On paper, without all that education that Welsh is talking about, or not Welsh, sorry, your friend is talking about, you just look at it. We talked about this in a previous SFR, that on paper it just looks like you're giving special benefits to these companies to just without competition, which I know this is already a government monopoly, but people don't understand that. So on paper it does look like a non-competitive sort of a bad issue, but when you know more about it, you start to realize it isn't as bad as it seems.
Correct, and that's really what all these proponents have said is we need to educate you, because the problem is that it came out in the last week of session.
Right.
They
tried to sneak it through.
You excluded a lot of people, and I understand why, because of the ComEd issues. So yeah, it's one where as you educate people, I think it'll be much better. You certainly want to make sure that we're using Illinois workers in Illinois, and so to some degree we'll see how good of a job they do over the springtime. And it'll come up again in May, probably.
Yeah, and I'd imagine some sort of a compromise here where you make sure that they're working under project labor agreements. There's a way to make this work.
There's no doubt that they can get it done, and I think all of them would admit that maybe they didn't quite do the political things
that's why they tried to
done.
sneak it in. I think there's a reason why they tried to sneak it in the last week.
Correct.
All right, let's keep going through veto session stuff. So another bill that did actually move, at least through the House, was the bill allowing legislative staff to unionize. We've talked about it a lot. This has been in the news a good amount. We've had discussions about it, that Welsh's staff has wanted to unionize. I guess my question for you is not only what's the status, but is this going to be yet another situation where it moves through one chamber and then the other chamber kills it so that they can say, not my problem?
It is amazing how silent the Senate president has been on this. And so I don't know. I think it would be very difficult for him not to call it. It sounds like it will from different people I'm talking to, but I'm talking to people in the House who have already voted for this and already want it to pass. We will see. It's got, it's got a compromise that I think people like. So, if I'm elected, or if someone's elected and I beat that person, I don't have to retain their staff. I mean, so there's some things that have been worked out to make it a better bill. But it affects everybody in the General Assembly.
We see this a lot of times with the people we elect, not even in Springfield, just in some of these counties where they have to deal with the union rules. And many of the times they have to work with the staff of their predecessor because they're not allowed to make changes to the staff. Right. So to me, that seems like a no-brainer change, because I know a lot of people we elect who are like, yeah, great, I want to do a whole bunch of new things, but I got to work with the old staff. I can't make any changes.
Well, this issue was adjudicated up in Avon Township Assessor's Office back when Yingling had them fired. I don't remember. This might have been a decade ago.
That was a while ago.
It was.
You and me are old, man.
We are old. So yeah, this has been adjudicated, so it's good to put this into the compromise that's going forward. My issue is this. I worked for a congressman. I was on the campaign side, but this is an entry-level position. Mm-hmm. You are expected to work hard. You're expected to you're going to be up till 1 in the morning. Yep. You're expected to come in at 7 in the morning the next day. But guess what? You got summers off. Yeah. Maybe not off, but not to the degree that you're working right now. And so, I've been through all this. It's amazing listening to some of the lobbyists that were former staffers, recount the old days. Well, remember when we had to do X, Y, and Z, and all these guys, all of a sudden they don't want to work that hard. I don't know what is true, but
there's been a change. I've watched it in my time in politics, which I'm a puppy compared to the many, many decades you've been around, old man. But In my time, I've seen this change with those LI positions and those staff positions where it's supposed to be the first job. It's supposed to be you start here and you move your way up the ladder, you do different things. This is sort of your entry. Now it seems like many of these people are sticking in those jobs, and so there's a change now where many of these people are just staying in that position. It was never intended to be that, and no disrespect to those who want to stay in that position, that's fine. But it's like saying, hey, listen, I'm flipping burgers and I always want to flip burgers. Like, it was intended to be your first job, and then you work your way up the ladder, and many people just have now changed that definition.
Yeah, I mean,
because they point to turnover. The proponents of this bill have been pointing to the high level of turnover amongst that staff as if it's a bad thing. Like, that's the design. It's supposed to have a high level of turnover because people are supposed to move on.
I can tell you how many times that I recommended one of my people I worked with to the next level job. That's how it goes. I'm a product of that. I worked for Congressman Phil Crane way back in the day, and then I ran for an office. Well, guess what? He endorsed me, and so I won. And then I became a state legislator. That's how it's supposed to take place in the political world. I don't know. Maybe I'm too old, and maybe this is the way to go. But hard work. That's the way I look at it.
So if you've got a problem with Ed, it's Phil Crane's fault. So you can blame him in the grave. Though I'm sure most of our people don't even know who Phil Crane is, though you do. All right, anyone have thoughts? I know union issues tend to get at least a few of you excited. Anyone want to jump in on this, or did we get it?
I have a hard time believing that President Harmon's not going to call this bill. They put so much pressure on Welsh for months and months and months to call this issue, and they got great publicity on it. So it's only just going to kick the can down the road if they don't decide to do something about it now. Why not just nip it in the bud and we can just all move on and do our jobs? Like, Lord knows we have a tough enough time already trying to get legislation passed. Like, this just seems like something we shouldn't be worrying about.
Yeah, I mean, here, Harmon should call it, but will he? And the question is, if he doesn't, now this is the conversation we've had for a while of, as working families see that they maybe don't have the friends and the Democrats that they thought they had, does this create an opportunity for Republicans? I know Chris is ready to tell me I'm wrong on that, but I think this is still, the more this is an issue, let's talk about the political realities, forget the governing realities, the political realities. I hope that Harmon's dumb enough not to call it and this thing drags into next year.
Well, working families might have friends in Republicans if any Republicans actually voted for the staff unionization bill, and I don't think any of them did. I think 5 of them voted present, which I guess is better than voting no.
Something, it's movement.
Yeah, but I don't know if Marty McLaughlin's present vote is going to be moving working families to the Republican Party anytime soon. And the other comment I wanted to make on this issue is we just passed a whole amendment to the Illinois State Constitution enshrining collective bargaining rights in the state, for workers in the state. So, and all of these Democrats supported that amendment, for better or for worse. So I don't know why it would be a hard issue for them to want for their staffs to unionize.
Well, it is rules for you and not for me. I mean, how many of these bills do they pass down in Springfield where they exempt themselves from those rules? Like now they're talking about, I just saw it's a minor bill, so I don't remember what it's for, but there's a bill about like paid leave requirements, and now they want to exempt forest preserve members from that bill and government workers from that bill. It's like they want to pass these laws that we business owners have to follow, but these units of government, they don't have to follow the same rules, which drives me crazy.
Sure. Yeah, I tell you, more and more I think about it, knowing how much that President Harmon has really worked with the unions, it would surprise me if they don't call it, but like I said, we haven't heard too much. And to some degree, that's how he operates. And, he's really close to the vest, and that's fine. That's his MO.
We'll find out.
Yep.
All right, next, let's talk about mental health boards. We've covered this. It seems like at our live SFRs, this always comes up, is mental health boards. And it's not because of anything other than it always seems to be in the news right around when we're going to do a live recording of our SFR. But Springfield is attempting to clean up confusion over these referendums. As we talked about last month, make sure you watch our Will County with Judy Ogala. We had a really good discussion about mental health boards. But in veto session, it looks like it's passed one chamber, now it's in the other chamber.
Correct.
To potentially clean up the fact that these referendums, 6 out of the 7 that were passed in this last election, didn't include that PTEL language, which we know very well because I know with a lot of these school board referendums, they have to include all that additional language, and when they don't, they potentially are in tough water because somebody could challenge it and maybe now it could get overturned. So 6 out of the 7 did not include that required language, and so now there's a lot of confusion. And we're in Schaumburg Township recording this at Byron Cigar Lounge. Thank you to Byron for hosting. Schaumburg Township was one of those that actually passed this language in 2022 and did not include the PTEL language. And so there's a lot of confusion over this. It looks like it's now halfway to being cleaned up. Are you
Correct.
hearing anything about this now?
So the bill passed from the Senate to the House. Basically, all they did two things. They took and changed from 102nd General Assembly to 103rd General Assembly. But they took the language, in essence, from the 2002 fix, if you will. And so just by changing the date, you keep the language, and all those people that passed it in the interim now are included in the original language. Yeah. And so the original language basically cleans it up and says they're fine. You pass the assuming you pass the referendum, you're going to be fine. But they also added language that says Wheeling Township cannot actually run their referendum. So if they pass one previous, they cannot run one in 2024.
Which that was a weird addition that I saw that was pointed out to us by a good friend of the program, McHenryCountyBlog.com, right? .com. John Lopez there provides a lot of good insight, and he's been on this. And he pointed out that to me that I didn't notice, which was that language about how you're not allowed to run a referendum, which to me is, because couldn't you run a referendum on the other side of this to try to stop these from happening, and that law might now stop you from even being able to do that?
I believe I believe in theory you are correct that if a citizens initiative came up and said, I want to end this referendum or end this community mental health board, that they could not run that now. But more importantly, you hear so much about local control, local control, local control. Hey, you got to leave it to local control until you don't.
Right.
And so now they're not allowing someone, and that's fine. I personally believe, if I had one of these mental health board referendums in my area, I'd vote for it. Of all the things we need coming out of the pandemic is more work on mental health, more funding for mental health. And so I'd vote for it, personally. Now, I don't know how other people think, but I believe that the more we can do for mental health, I'm willing to pay it. So.
Well, there's a lot of discussions going on right now in McHenry County as they're trying to figure out how much they put into this. There's an active discussion by the county board, which the blog I mentioned, McHenry County blog, is covering. So if you're interested in that, feel free to keep up on that. I know it's a big discussion in Will County, which we covered last month, and they've now brought it to a vote in Will County. A lot of these townships are looking at it. Just because the voters passed the referendum that says you can do this, now it's up to the actual government entity to do it and to decide how much they invest in it, how much they fund. So it's those conversations that are also happening right now. So it's definitely something people should keep an eye on. Because as you said, these are investments that I think you could explain as positive investments. On the other side, they are tax dollars. So there needs to be a conversation over how much do we invest into these things.
Sure, but once again, local control can have those discussions. The citizens voted for it.
Right. Well, and that's what we want, right? I mean, that's really, I know you and I align on this very well, which is I want local property taxpayers to decide how much they're willing to invest into various things, because some of them are going to say, we want to invest more in mental health, in 708 boards, in our schools. And some will say, we don't want to invest more. Let's let the local taxpayers make those decisions instead of bureaucrats in Springfield.
Yeah, I remember in the General Assembly, someone would come up and be like, well, we're going to have a referendum on this, so you're not increasing the taxes. On the Republican side, people are like, there's a tax increase. I'm voting no. And I'm like, I'm letting the citizens decide for themselves to tax themselves. I'm voting yes. And, it's just a difference of opinion.
Yeah, well, if you believe in limited government, you believe in letting local control over maybe state control of these different decisions. So it's definitely something worth keeping an eye on. And we'll let you guys know as our viewers where this ends up in the second week of veto session. Looks like it's probably going to pass, but we'll see what happens. All right, next. Let's talk about, I don't know how much you have on this, and it's not a big topic that's gotten in the news a lot, but this fight over nursing homes. To me, just on the political side, it seems like a big battle between HCCI and SEIU, which we'll talk about politically. But just when it comes to the bill itself, there's this property tax break that was kind of snuck in for these nursing homes. What is this, and what are you hearing about it?
So HCCI,
Healthcare Council of Illinois, for those who don't know.
Healthcare Council of Illinois. Very strong lobby presence in Springfield.
And they donate a lot to political campaigns?
They donate a lot to political campaigns. I know the people that started in that, good people. I don't, they're there to protect the nursing home industry. They believe that there's problems in some of the areas where property taxes are too high. And so in Cook County, and this is what we're talking about, the level of assessment on a property nursing home would be statutory set at 25% of value. Okay. And so what this bill did was it said, all right, we're now going to mandate 10% of value. So in essence, a 150% tax break, if I did my math correct. Probably not, but whatever. 25% to 10%. I
don't
think,
hold us
I,
responsible for Ed's bad math.
I think it's 150%. Whatever.
150% would mean they'd probably be getting money back from the state, because that would be minus
He's using
25.
government math.
Right,
All
right.
right,
Government
we're not
math,
in it for the math, guys. Let's just
More
like.
more than anything, that's what the bill did. The governor said, you guys got a huge break in some of the fees that we did for you guys to the tune of $700 million. We think that this is, this is too much. You shouldn't be able to get this. But this is really a fight between the union
Yep.
and the folks. And
Well,
so,
that's the big thing, and I want to throw it to the political team just to talk about this briefly, because there's more to this, right? There's the policy side, but this is a political thing for sure. HCCI is a pretty powerful group. They donate a lot of money to campaigns. They're one of the, usually annually, they're one of the top donors to campaigns outside of like unions.
Sure.
And then it's SEIU on the other side who's fighting against this. You're pitting two pretty powerful entities against each other on this bill, which
Sure.
is why it's fascinating to me. Curious if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, SEIU is trying to make a name for itself, kind of to juxtapose the AFL-CIO in this state. And the SEIU is typically a more progressive-orientated union. They back very, very progressive candidates in many different races. I just think about the mayoral election in Chicago this year, how much they love our old friend Brandon Johnson. But SEIU is making moves, and it doesn't surprise me that they're going to take on a big power like the healthcare lobby and something like this to try and get more power for themselves.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't think anyone denies that property taxes, especially in South Suburban Cook County, are a serious problem. This is one of those where I definitely understand both sides of the argument that property taxes are a problem for everyone. So if we give somebody a break, other people have to pay. On the flip side, these nursing homes, from what I hear, are at risk of closing. Then what do you do?
Right.
So I think there's definitely a need for a larger focus on the problem of property taxes in the south suburbs. I know as a resident of the north suburbs, Fritz Kagi is going to come calling and saying, hey, fine, then you pay more to cover their property taxes, which I'm not willing to do. So,
So
we're
the
gonna see where
reality,
this all comes around.
this is what happens. If one entity gets a property tax break, someone else takes it up because of how PTEL works. But if you look at it, in Lake County where I live, maybe 3 to 4% of my value is property taxes. In the south suburbs, it could be 20%.
Yep.
It is. They really need to work on commercial enterprises down there. So if truly nursing homes are going to close, well then you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, because they close, there's no more property tax base, and that gets taken up by everybody
Well, and
else
one
too.
of the big problems in Cook County, it's well known, if you want to live somewhere and get lower property taxes, Cook County is actually better than some of the surrounding counties on the property taxes you pay on residential. It's commercial where they completely come after you. So if you're smart, you live in Cook County but own a business outside of Cook County. And so to your point about how South Suburban Cook County is struggling, it's because that commercial tax base is so limited, and the fact that Cook County taxes are so focused on commercial that as a result, it's leaving that burden on everybody else, and it's creating a huge problem. So maybe the solution is stop dumping so much on we commercial property taxpayers, because I know when I bought a building for our company and for our team and saw that property tax bill that we're paying on the commercial level, my head almost exploded. So the solution is not dump more on our small businesses who are already struggling to pay those commercial property taxes. That's
Correct.
why they can't bring those businesses in the south suburbs, because those property taxes are so ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of problems in the south suburbs. It's education, it's jobs, it's all the rest, and they're struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, you good on this, Chris?
I'm just glad to hear people talk about my side of town and the concerns that people in my side of town have to worry
God
about.
forbid we should talk about DuPage or some
You
other
have no
other-
problems in DuPage County. Everything is
Do you re-
perfect there in your nice
Oh,
suburbia.
Oh, okay.
Oliver, I hear DuPage County people are big fans of Chris Jacobiak.
Yeah, that's not exactly what I heard.
Wait till next month, DuPage County. I'm going to start naming names.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to allow us to bring. We're going to be in person in DuPage soon. It sounds
Yeah.
like, and I think they're going to tell us you're allowed in as long as you don't bring Chris. So maybe we'll have Butler come in and take his seat.
Lane, you're pretty smart for putting me in between these two so they're not at each other's throats. It almost happened one time. It was ugly.
As long as I get that night off and watch some Thursday night football and not have to go to DuPage County, sounds like a win to me.
All right, let's keep moving along. Get through some of the topics on veto session, because we got a lot of political topics to get into. So, Ed, I know this is something you were probably having to stay up late at night dealing with, but it looks like bill has been revived on alleged domestic violence abusers to take away their guns. And it sounds like this kind of died more of a quiet death in session, but it looks like with some recent things happening in the news, including somebody that a state representative's legislative aide is related to,
Sure.
police officer getting shot this week. Looks like this might be coming back. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, so there was 2 bills that entertained this topic last session. A standalone bill, House Bill 1404, and then there was another bill, we call it an omnibus anti-gun bill that had it called HB 676. The concept is here. If someone files a domestic violence order protection against somebody, and that person has firearms, the court, as a remedy, can order them to not have firearms. Now, existing law says if you have one of these filed against you, your FOID card is suspended. If your FOID card is suspended, you, within 48 hours, must dispose of your firearms through the FOID Act. That's 9.5. So that's the law. The
There
problem
already is a mechanism for this.
there already is a mechanism for this. The question is government following through on removing firearms or forcing them to remove firearms? The problem with the issue at hand is it was over a woman filed a domestic violence order of protection against her husband. Government failed that woman no less than 3 or 4 times. So she filed the order, and for whatever reason, the courts, another remedy is to order the person, so it could be whatever partner, out of the home. And so in this case that they're talking about, Katrina's Law is what they're naming it, this woman was killed, her and her daughter. The husband, who should not have had a gun. And I'll kind of explain why. Listen, gun owners don't want people to have guns that are causing problems like
Responsible gun owners.
Responsible gun owners are like, yeah, that person shouldn't have had a gun. So the next day, the woman called, the police came, he had his firearm, now he had a FOID card, and it was valid. The cops, Chicago PD, were interviewing this subject, and were like, man, he's not all there. Mm-hmm. They filed a clear and present danger order against this gentleman, this person. I don't want to call him a gentleman, a monster. But they filed this against him, but they didn't take his firearm. And so that's the second time the woman was failed, third time the woman was failed. And 8 days later, he killed her. And so the proponents have come up with an idea, and listen, we haven't seen language yet on what they're going to do. We're hearing that they're going to have, at the court date, have the courts file a search warrant, okay, which to some degree can be problematic because I don't know any judge that's going to sign a search warrant based off of third-party allegations. Yeah. Because here's the other part of this bill. They're going to do these ex parte, which means you can have this hearing without the defendant there. And so that's problematic. Somewhere in the middle is a happy medium. Right now there's no discussions going forth in Springfield on how to get there. But the problem I have right now is they're using a tragedy to further erode constitutional rights. We could get there, we could try to get there, but the way they have proposed that we're hearing, you're taking away the ability for someone to be in court. And then, here's the last part of this bill that is the one that I think most gun owners really have a problem with. They're forcing people to give up their firearms to law enforcement. So this is the first time that a person subject to one of these orders is forced to turn over their firearms to law enforcement. And so, first off, law enforcement doesn't want to take these guns because there's huge liability. I mean, there's people with $250,000 gun collections. Yep. But here's the really big problem that is kind of inside the weeds or inside baseball that people might not know about the law. Let's say that this person that is the subject or the defendant of this order ends up losing their FOID card forever. Maybe they had a drug problem that caused the problems that they're doing. Maybe they have a mental illness that caused the problems. If you have a drug problem or if you have a mental illness, you are not allowed to have a FOID card. If you're not allowed to have a FOID card, you're not allowed to have a firearm. In the existing law, there's 3 remedies when law enforcement has a firearm and they can't give them back to the subject because they don't have a FOID card. Mm-hmm. They could either find someone to give them to, which is a remedy. They can give them to a family member, I guess. They could use them for whatever the law enforcement wants to use them for, or they can have them destroyed. And so you're taking the firearms, and then a court has a remedy to destroy your firearms. So think about, once again, the person that has a $250,000 gun collection, $10,000 gun collection, and the courts destroy those.
Yeah.
That's the problem we have. It's not underlying, we could get around the rest of it, but that's the portion that I have. I have my great-grandfather's single-shot 410 shotgun. I have my grandfather's service weapon or firearm from World War II.
Yeah.
I don't know what those are worth, but they're worth a lot to me.
The sentimental value is huge.
Yeah. So it's a tough subject, one that I know gun owners want to solve. It's just, I
Well,
think
there's a rightful place to say, yet again, we're talking about a situation where government didn't do their jobs. There are already mechanisms that
Failed
would have avoided
miserably.
the situation, and yet again, government didn't do what they were supposed to do. So our remedy is, instead of saying let's follow the laws that already exist and actually do what we're supposed to do, let's create even more laws.
Right.
It seems like this is always our solution, rather than let's fix the current problems and actually implement the laws that are currently in place. Because it sounds like if that had been done, this woman and her child would still be alive.
Right. They would have. So here's maybe a tough thing to say. This woman had we haven't seen the new language, but according to House Bill 1404, had that been in place, it would not have helped the woman, because government didn't do their job. Law enforcement didn't go in and take the guns. The Chicago PD didn't go in and take the guns. The courts didn't order the guy out of the house.
Yeah.
I don't understand all that. And so it's no different than Highland Park, where that person should not have had a firearm because government failed. Aurora, same thing. That person shouldn't have a firearm because government failed. So 3 times in a row, government failed and constitutional rights are eroded.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and my personal thing on this, and this is where I'll just end this discussion while opening up to my political team, is just this quote drove me crazy from the executive director of an advocacy organization for domestic violence. Her quote was, "The heart-wrenching murder here," I'm paraphrasing, "is yet another devastating reminder of our collective failure to protect domestic violence survivors from firearms." It just always drives me crazy that it's always protect them from the firearm. And I think your point from law-abiding gun owners is the firearm here, yes, was the mechanism used, but it was this individual who was the problem, and the court system exists to stop that individual from having firearms. But
Correct.
It seems like all these quotes, we have a great opportunity to come to a resolution here, a compromise to say, okay, how do we find a situation where this doesn't happen again, but we don't take away the constitutional rights of other people who aren't breaking the law, and yet we're instead just going the lazy route of saying it was the firearms problem, and
Yep.
it wasn't the firearm, it was the individual who used that firearm to do some horrible, horrible, horrible things. Anybody have thoughts on this as we close the topic?
Totally. And I think, as you were saying, Ed, perfectly, is passing new legislation is only half or maybe even less than half of the problem of laws are great, but they're meaningless, and they probably take away from other good laws if they're not enforced upon. I could pass a law that says everyone needs to be happy and healthy and have a lot of money. Great. Unless there's something that can back that up and enforce that and make that come to fruition, then it's useless. And I think that that's important for lawmakers and voters to know of. That's why it's important to get good judges elected. That's why it's important to make sure that mayors and people who are in charge of these police forces are taking care of their police officers and making sure that they're educated on these things. So I think that it's multi-levels of government that we need to focus on, and particularly people on the left who want to use this to push their agenda. They shouldn't just be calling out legislators and trying to pass laws. They should be calling out their mayors and their judges and the police officers.
And the prosecutors.
And the prosecutors. So
Sure.
it's multi-levels of government that needs fixing.
I mean, this is yet another situation. Talk about the Safety Act. It's yet another situation where if prosecutors go in and do what they need to do, you could possibly avoid these situations. But then you have people like Kim Foxx who don't ever want to
Totally.
prosecute crimes, and so they're instructed to just avoid prosecution any chance you get. Well, in this situation, prosecutors do have that tool under their belt to go to the judge and say these firearms should be removed. And where was that? Why was that not done?
We actually, a few years back, suggested that at a court hearing, if you know the person has a FOID card, as part of bail, way back before we no longer have bail, that they have to relinquish their FOID card and their firearms if they've been obviously proven that this took place. Never went anywhere. You know, FOID Modernization Act a few years ago, state police got 60% more revenue than they had before under that act, because we in essence shifted money from the FOID fee that used to go to DNR Department of Natural Resources to them. So they have the money.
Yeah.
They set up task force and intergovernmental agreements to, use other law enforcement to go in and do the job that they need to do. It just didn't get done.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is the point, right? It's if we go in and use the mechanisms available to us, we can avoid a lot of these problems. But just like some of the bills we talked about earlier about how negotiating with terrorists who have a political agenda and only want their political agenda, they don't actually want progress. They only want their political agenda. And that's what I saw from this domestic violence executive director organization, where it was like, your agenda here is to make progress in avoiding these heinous acts when it comes to domestic violence. Instead, you're focused on a gun agenda. That is not your job in this organization. Your job is not to get rid of all the guns. Your job is to keep women and children safe, and I guess sometimes men, but it's usually women and children that deal with these problems.
Yeah.
That's your job, not get rid of all the guns. But so many of these times we see these people with the environmentalist agenda. I just want my 100% agenda. Instead of, could we sit down at the table and negotiate and find some sort of a plan that actually makes people's lives better? Gee, isn't that the job of these legislators?
Yeah, well, and I can tell you, because I know this issue very well, those outreaches were made.
Yeah.
Here's the problems with your bill,
Yeah.
and here we wait. So
there's
it is what it is.
been a good faith effort to actually do that, but it hasn't actually happened.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm talking so much that my cigar keeps getting in the way. All right, let's go to the next one so we can get through these veto session topics. This can be a quick one, but we've talked on the last couple episodes about how Republicans should make Democrats stand up and make some sort of a statement on where they stand on Israel, Hamas, and with the conflict that's happening in the Middle East. There is currently an effort to force that to happen down in Springfield, and it seems like Democrats are doing everything they can to avoid having to wade into that drama. What do you think? Do you think they're going to be able to be successful, or is this going to hit a fever pitch in the second week?
We'll see. It started in the House. There is a first-time Palestinian legislator who obviously has an opinion based on his belief structure and who he is. There's a Muslim woman legislator. There's a very strong Jewish caucus headed by Bob Morgan. And so, very passionate people, all of them, all good people. I don't want to, this is a tough issue.
Yep.
And so the Democrats don't want to get involved in a skirmish on the House floor because it would be on their side that the skirmish would take place.
Well, this would fracture them completely.
It would. And so.
But I just always find it funny. They don't want to talk about national issues when it would hurt them, but they're happy to talk about national issues when it helps them politically.
No, I completely understand. To some degree, I think, Speaker Welch has handled it well. In the Senate, they allowed a discussion, and they had it pre-planned. Some people are going to talk, some other people are going to talk, and it was very civil. And so I think, because listen, this is a very heartfelt issue on both sides. Whether I have an opinion or not, I certainly understand it. I know this issue well. So I think they're handling it well. They really stressed in the Senate we're going to negotiate who speaks on both sides. And so obviously some people talked about what took place in Israel, and then Senator Capel from Plainfield discussed the young boy that was,
It's a horrible situation.
tragically,
Yeah.
just stupid. I don't even understand people, but
Well, I think we can all agree people are the worst, which is why we have
Right.
situations like this.
right.
But I think from us politically, it's just something that I'm happy to see. I know this is where you maybe have to tap out of the conversation, but politically, I'm happy to see that Republicans are pushing this because so often Democrats, when something happens, they make Republicans all answer for what one idiot did or what one group did, and Republicans don't tend to play that game. It may or may not work this time, but we're at least making Welch and Harmon and those guys have to work a bit to avoid a controversy that could hurt their members. And I love to see the fight out of our side of the aisle, the Republican side of the aisle. So that's what I'm happy to see. I don't know where it goes, but I do love to see some of that fight. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
This reminds me a lot of when the Safety Act was a big controversy and we were all trying to negotiate it. I remember the DuPage County Board, Republicans wanted to have a discussion about this legislation that was clearly problematic for Democrats. And they tried 3 times, I think, to have just let's have a discussion. Let's talk about how this is going to affect our economy, our safety issues. They flat out refused to do it, and it made them look terrible. It's still something that people bring up to this day. So I think if we're able to bring them onto the floor and force them to be on the record, or at least force them to fight about it, I think it is a really effective tool.
I think it's a great point by you, Oliver, that frankly should be part of the discussion of if they don't let the conversation happen, that can be used against these legislators. That, they wouldn't even stand up and have a conversation
Right.
about this and allow this to be discussed. if you're in one of those districts where you're going against a vulnerable Democrat, you can use that against a Democratic incumbent. So instead of saying, okay, they stood up and said the wrong thing, now you're saying they wouldn't even stand up and say anything.
Correct.
So I think this can be used in either way, regardless of how that last week of veto session goes.
Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, we saw.
Isn't that Chris's job?
That's Chris's job, but
I want to hear this.
we'll see if I can do it as well as Chris. But we saw a few weeks ago when those 16, I believe it was 16 representatives came out and said something that made a huge whirlwind negatively for them. And I don't think that there's anything that the Democrats in the House or the Senate could say that would please all their members and all their constituents. So politically, I don't think it's a bad play for them. While I disagree with it maybe morally, I don't think it's a bad play for them to be silent. And you said, yes, Republicans can go after them for that. But a lot of times I think voters are more willing to forgive and forget in absence of doing something than from doing something negatively.
Oh yeah, listen, the play on the Democrat side is exactly what they're doing. So you're not wrong, DeRay. My point is there's still a way you can even use that.
I agree. And one more thing on that is, while I agree that we should address issues and moral issues and they should say something about it, at the same time is there should be focus mainly on Illinois, and there's nothing that legislators could do or pass or anything that they could actually do to affect anything that's happening in the Middle East.
Yeah, and
But
yet
they do that to Republicans all the time, DeRay.
That never seems to stop the
Yeah.
Democrats on national issues when it helps them. But I get your point. I get it.
Maybe they're doing something decent for once, maybe
Yeah,
politically.
yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
Let's
We
settle
got
down here.
happy-go-lucky DeRay this time again. I don't know who
It
this
flips
guy
every
is.
week, so.
All right, let's keep moving along. I want to go to Rich. So I introduced Ed at the beginning of this because we're talking about veto session. He's our special guest. I didn't introduce our political team members who are here, and this random dude who also happens to be sitting here. So our political team, Abby, Chris, Matt, thank you guys. Rich Carter, our government affairs guy at CORE, is also here because we're talking about government affairs issues. Rich has been working a lot with a lot of the business associations, manufacturing groups, and so one of the topics he wanted to cover, which he's right, is that in all these discussions we've had about what is or isn't happening in Springfield, what I haven't heard a peep about is BIPA. And that is a huge issue for a lot of these businesses and business groups. So Rich is here to talk about that and other things. So Rich, specifically on this BIPA or BIPA reform that we're hearing nothing about, I know you're hearing from a lot of your business groups that they're frustrated that this isn't getting talked about.
Yeah, and just for the listeners, BIPA is the Biometric Information Privacy Act. And what it is basically several years ago, the state passed this legislation after a technology company that was using fingerprints for people to pay for groceries actually went out of business and wound up selling the information to get back some of their money that they lost in bankruptcy. And so the state filed legislation, actually, believe it or not, back in 2008. It was never really challenged until, I'd say, 2015, when I think some of the trial attorneys, specifically class action attorneys, not even in Illinois, realized they could actually go after some businesses and get some significant settlements on this. It got worse in 2019 when the Illinois Supreme Court ruled that there doesn't need to be an injury at all on anyone. Just the fact that a company took someone's biometric information, whether, now a lot of it is eyes, but fingerprints, eye scans. The law says you have to let them know you're doing that, and you have to get their informed consent to do that. Right. And a lot of the companies really didn't understand that.
Right.
And so they started
They're holding
doing
them responsible for things that companies didn't even know they needed to do, and then awarding massive monetary damages against them when the companies are like, you didn't tell us we needed to do this, and now you're holding us responsible for something you didn't tell us we needed to do.
Exactly.
That summarizes it at least pretty well.
Yeah.
So, and then
then
you've got businesses with these multi-billion-dollar liability, or for even smaller businesses, million-dollar liability that they're facing. They need this cleaned up, just to summarize the discussion. And
Yeah. Well,
ultimately, these businesses need some action taken here, because how it's written, even the Supreme Court in Illinois, the left of center, fairly far left of center, Supreme Court in Illinois said, this is a problem, Springfield, fix this. Even they said to fix this, and Springfield's not even touching it.
No, and as you said, what happened was in March, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled that each instance, every time you take someone's fingerprint or their eye scan, that's a violation, and that's a $1,000 penalty every single time. And they ruled that in a case against White Castle, where an employee was going in and clocking in using their fingerprint. And White Castle really quickly determined if we have to take every instance, our liability is $17 billion. That's a lot of sliders.
Yep.
$17 billion.
That's a lot of diarrhea right there.
Yeah. And
That's
so-
what I was going to say. I don't know if White Castle's biggest problem is their fingerprints or their food, but we'll let the voters decide.
I
that.
feel like actually Cottonelle should join in this because they're going to lose a lot of money if White Castle goes away.
yeah.
Probably.
Well, maybe the voters should chime in about 1 in the morning.
Right?
Would that be better
Right.
on the whole White Castle thing?
Right. No
I
one
mean,
cares until it's
right, till
they're
about
the
1 in the
only-
morning.
Them and Taco Bell are your only options.
Yeah, well,
So,
I mean,
I
you hear
think-
about White Castle, you hear about this happened to Six Flags Great America.
Six
They
Flags
got
Great
caught
America.
in Facebook. Remember when
Yep.
everyone got those big checks?
Yep.
But the bottom line is, the bottom line is right now they're really going after the small and medium-sized businesses. And believe it or not, we did some research. There are 1,300 businesses just in the Chicagoland area right now facing a BIPA lawsuit.
Sheesh.
And we know some of them. We've talked to them. One is a small manufacturer, and right now they're going under a settlement with a class action attorney who's not even based here again. And the problem with not having this fixed is that now they're facing these massive catastrophic liabilities, and so the attorneys are able to now settle at much higher rates
Yep.
than what they initially were able to come in at because the Supreme Court ruled that it's per instance instead of per individual.
And without Springfield coming in and making some sort of a fix, that's going to be their reality for a long time.
Yeah.
This is going to put some businesses under that can't afford that kind of liability.
Exactly. And so, we've been, one of the associations we're working with has been pleading with Springfield, please fix this as the Supreme Court told you to do, and nothing.
Yep.
We're not hearing anything. We were thinking it was going to be solved during the veto session, but there's nothing going on. Ed, have you heard anything about this in the veto?
I have. I'm going to unfortunately have to plead the fifth on this one because I have clients wholly involved with it. And
So
I'd rather
all-
not get in trouble.
Yeah, which we respect. We appreciate you being here and saying what you can. But I know this is, we talked about unions kind of getting the shaft in Springfield. Businesses have always gotten the shaft. And yet again, here we are, where business interests, no one's even talking about, hey, what could we do for the business community to help a community that really needs some assistance in the state of Illinois right now? And crickets, nothing. Yeah. All right, let's make a soft transition out of veto session, but still into some issues here, because it was announced in the last week that Navigator is going to be canceling their CO2 pipeline that they were trying to bring through. And carbon capture, you hear coming up a bit more in the news. People are talking about it. It's yet another situation where the private sector has said, okay, you'd like to move towards a more environmentally friendly option. Here's a way we could do it. We could capture this carbon and not pump it up into the atmosphere. We could put it somewhere where it's safer. And yet even still those environmentalists who want all or nothing, they just want them to shut down, which means what? We go back to the Stone Ages with no power. And that seems like the only way they'd actually be happy. What are you hearing about this whole fiasco?
Yeah, so this was actually a big priority for the Biden administration in their overall energy plan, their future energy plan. I mean, the idea is to capture the carbon as it's being produced, sequester it, and bring it and bury it deep down in the earth. And Illinois actually has some geologic formations that make it like the center of where this is going on. ADM's been doing this for a long time in Decatur. And so there have been several companies that are looking to build pipelines to capture the carbon and bring it to Illinois, sequester it, and it's run into all kinds of opposition. The environmentalists got involved early on. They've been fighting this for a couple of years, right when the company started talking about it, because if you have carbon capture, that means you have carbon.
Right.
And they don't want carbon
Right.
at all. So they
So
see
it's
this.
a stepping stone to what they want, but they don't. It's all or nothing.
No.
stepping stones, no progress. Just snap your fingers and be carbon neutral, as if we didn't need to take steps to get there, as if that wasn't the reality.
Yep, exactly. And these environmentalist groups just really organized early, and they got a lot of their members organized. They've been holding town hall meetings. Then they got the farmers engaged, because the farmers are the ones that have to provide the easements for the pipelines. And then it turned into an eminent domain issue with the farmers. And there were just several different issues facing this that have appeared over the last year. That Navigator, which is one of 3 companies right now looking to build pipelines to sequester this in Illinois, Navigator just said, you know what, we're done. This is not the right time, the right environment to have this discussion in the Midwest.
Well, let's
so
talk
we're
about the
done.
groups that were behind this. I mean, the unions were very strongly behind this. It's jobs, it's income in the state of Illinois, it's economic development in the state of Illinois. So a lot of the unions were behind it. I know there was other groups that were backing this. So yet again, it seems like unions are getting the shaft again in Springfield, which is a new reality for them that I got to imagine makes them not super happy.
This was a huge issue for the unions, especially the pipe fitters, because they're the ones that would build these pipelines. I mean, there was a lot of jobs involved. Plus, I think for a lot of the unions of pipe fitters, they take pride in their work. And, you know, to have these opposition groups come out and claim that this is just going to leak all over the place and it's going to kill people, and that's so far from the truth if you know what goes into making these things. And so I think they're frustrated again here in Illinois with that. I think, you know, the farmers were caught in the middle on the eminent domain issues. They didn't know what to think.
Right.
But for those who grow corn, this is going to be a huge thing, because ethanol right now, everyone's focused on zero carbon ethanol. You have to somehow make the ethanol without putting carbon out. That's the way a lot of states now are buying their ethanol. And the one way to do that was this. This is going to be a huge market for farmers, for corn growers, for ethanol, producers. And without it, it's going to be really tough for them to continue on.
So yet another situation of good politics getting in the way of bad policy, or getting in the way of good policy, where the politics of it, we're standing for farmers, and but when that isn't actually what was happening, but they convinced a bunch of people that they were right, and now we're looking at yet another situation where an investment in the state of Illinois, a step towards a cleaner environment, is now possibly on the ropes or not going to happen. 1/3 of the pipelines have been canceled. The other two are facing problems as well. So we're seeing again that politics is getting in the way of doing something that might actually move the ball forward.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this, or you want to play the fifth?
No, this is something that's going on for at least 2 decades. Back way when Senator Chapin Rose, it might have been House member Chapin Rose at that time, was working on a clean coal plant that would have sequestered carbon too. If I'm remembering the correct bill, like 15 to 20 years ago. So this fight's been going on for a long, long time, and it's the same fight that's been going on from 20 years ago. I don't see any end to it. If your goal is no carbon, you will always be opposed to this. And that's the problem. There's no happy medium in between. And listen, the the environmental groups, they have a powerful lobby. Multiple groups, but
And right now they got Pritzker's ear for sure.
and they have Pritzker's ear, and that's fine. It's amazing that they're going against what the president wants. That's the unique characteristic of this debate today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
the amazing thing to me is that's fine, if they don't want carbon. But going back to our prior discussion about the Nuke bill, I mean, the bottom
I had
line
one.
is, the CEJA bill they just passed, the Clean Energy Jobs Act 2 years ago, that put all these huge targets on renewable energy, says that Illinois will be producing 40% renewable energy by 2030, That's 7 years from now. Guess how much we're producing now? 10.5%.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get to 40%. And then he says 50% 10 years later. I mean, I don't know how you get there by just doing wind and solar power.
Well, what the reality is we're going to shut down all these plants, so we're not basically producing energy. And then we're going to import it from these states that don't have the same laws. So we're going to import dirty coal-powered energy, and then clap our hands and say, look at us politicians, we did a great job. We hit our marks, even though we've actually hurt the environment, not helped it. Gotta love it. All right, let's keep moving on just because we are starting to run out of time. I want to get into some of the political topics. And as I said, some of these Ed may have to not jump in, but I want to get my political team engaged in some topics. First, let's go to Oliver. We've talked about Jeanne Ives and her right to parent referendum. Well, it's now gone public. The Cranes did an article. They've been doing interviews on this. The language seems to have now surfaced. We know what's going to be possibly on the ballot if they do get the signatures.
Correct.
Give us an update on what's going on here.
Yep, so about 10 days ago, they launched the Parents Matter Coalition, which is basically, Jeanne Ives Group's Breakthrough Ideas, Illinois Family Institute, Right to Life groups. They're all working together. They want to get 500,000 signatures to get this referendum on the ballot for 2024. So I'm just going to read out the language so everyone, I know we talked about it a little bit in past weeks, and we more centered on the conversation about, okay, is this about...
You don't have to read it. Lane will bring it up in post.
Yeah,
You
so
don't
I
have to read
think we more discussed it in the sense, okay, this is going to be kind of about the trans issue, but I think what they're trying to do is capture a larger audience by saying, okay, this isn't just about that. This is like any type of medication, any kind of non-emergent medical procedure. Parents need to be informed if their minors are going to be undergoing those procedures.
So they brought abortion into it, basically.
Correct.
The larger point is this was going to be, from what we heard, more of a trans issue, a parents' rights issue.
Yeah.
Something that, if we put the wedge, you always, in wedge politics, you want to push the wedge where you're on the
Yeah.
bigger side of that wedge after you shove it in. And in this case now, because they've expanded to abortion,
Yeah.
I think the Democrats are like, cool, get the signatures, because you think you're going to push your base. You put something on the ballot in 2024 that's going to help us get our pro-abortion base out to the polls. Go for it. I'm all for it.
Well, I think the logic was, okay, well, maybe if people aren't as passionate about this issue about gender identity, maybe we can get them on the abortion issue, or maybe we can get them on just, parental consent issues. But I think, like you're saying, it ends up muddying the water where it gives Democrats an opening to oppose this bill and kind of rile up their base about an issue they're already passionate about and already ready to go on. So.
And we've talked about, on the abortion issue, talking about parental notification is solid ground for us, and we should engage on that in the abortion space. So it sounds like we're talking a little bit about both sides of our mouth here, in that we're saying this one maybe isn't the way to do it, because in the way this is being done, maybe this pushes our base to the polls, but it sure as heck is going to push their base to the polls too. And that's not how if you're going to put a referendum on the ballot, you want to put a referendum on the ballot that only gets your base to the polls. If you're helping the other side, you should maybe take a second and think about it.
Well, and we see this time and time again with ballot referendums, the language that totally kills you. It's like, okay, you go out with the goal of saying, like, I think in Kansas was a great example. They had a referendum where they wanted to repeal kind of some of the abortion laws or make abortion less available. But the law with the referendum language was so muddy that people didn't really know what they were voting for. Or like you're saying, it creates this wedge or these different types of things, and that's where you see it go wrong. It's like you go in with one intention, but you end up with a different result.
So good idea about execution,
correct.
Basically?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give them credit for the idea. There is an idea here that took a little bit of thought, that has some pieces of it that actually make strategic sense.
Yeah.
And we don't often see that, so I will give kudos on that. The problem is, so far, it looks like execution. All they're doing is riling up the pro-abortion side and the Democrat side. And Democrats were already talking about in 2024 passing something down in Springfield that put some sort of abortion language on the ballot in 2024. We're almost helping them with what they wanted in the first place now. I'm curious, are you hearing anything about that for next session, about something abortion related?
We really haven't heard a lot of it. But, I remember when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and a lot of us that kind of understand the politics behind what's going on said, watch what you wish for. Because we saw what happened at the ballot box when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Whether you're for or against, I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but the politics is exactly, I think Jeanne potentially, might have something that will, as you said, incite the other side. And so if she does get this on the ballot, I would almost expect to be a counter proposal that will come through the General Assembly.
Yeah, like why not lean into it?
Yeah,
double up.
right. Double up.
My only comment here was I was speaking with somebody who was circulating the petition for this referendum, and they told me they needed a minimum of 600,000.
500,000 what's on the website, so I don't know.
But I think they're probably giving themselves a cushion.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's what they're putting out publicly, but
Okay,
they may
so
be
I
telling
heard-
people other
I heard
things.
I heard that 600,000 minimum, and I was like, that's going to be a very tall. I didn't know it was that bad of how that's somebody.
Well, if anything, these Right to Life groups and Jeanne Ives, she has a very strong grassroots volunteer base. Like, I have no doubt that they're going to be putting every effort into getting these signatures done.
And listen, and I always want to take both sides and
Yeah.
give a balance here. I give credit. We have talked about, on the abortion issue, we need to move the conversation to things like parental notification. So I can imagine that's part of the goal here, and I give kudos to that. It's just, again, execution versus the idea. The execution here, at least so far, we'll see how this plays out, doesn't look like it's going to help more than it's going to hurt, but we'll see.
One positive that this could bring would be you can bring people who maybe vote straight Republican, but they're not politically involved, or they're not involved in a signature gathering process or with Republican candidates. You could tap into churches, you can tap into right-of-center voters who aren't in the political game. And I know people who would be more than willing to go out and get signatures for something like this, but they wouldn't go out and get them for a Republican candidate who's maybe more moderate. So regardless of how this affects elections, I think that political parties, the Republican Party could do a good job of trying to use this to farm out some of our more conservative voters and get them active.
Yeah, that's a good point, Greg. All right, let's keep moving. Couple topics. I have a feeling Ed is for sure not going to talk about this one. But we got to talk about it because hypocrisy has come up yet again in Illinois politics. So it was reported this week that Don Harmon, among others, but it was mostly Don Harmon as the headliner, after voting to say that red light cam companies cannot donate to politicians, then turned around and took multiple donations from these red light camera companies, which I'm summarizing the overall issue, but that's the basic gist of the point. And we see this over and over. I'm going to pass it to Chris for your thoughts. We see this over and over. It seems like Harmon is that old school politician where some of these others wouldn't pull this off, but if it's anyone's going to try this, it's Don Harmon. And here we go. Like, this is even when the Sun Times is even calling you out on this and saying this is ridiculous.
You know you've done wrong.
Yeah.
Because Lord knows Don Harmon needs even more campaign funds.
$5,000. Like, why would you open yourself up to this for $5,000?
Well, I mean, and he did it. I mean, he did it legally because he got the donations before this law technically took effect. But it just breeds very tone deaf after we spent 4+ years dealing with how indictment after indictment after indictment related to red light cameras, and now you're going to take even more money from these people. Look, I live in Crestwood, Illinois. I don't know if any of our viewers know about the little town of Crestwood, Illinois. I call it the town of poison water and red light cameras. Now, our former mayor, Lou Presta, he went to jail for a couple months as a part of these indictments related to red light cameras. And now, Crestwood got rid of the red light cameras. Our new mayor, who's Lou's son-in-law, he was smart enough to get rid of the red light cameras. But here we got people down in Springfield who can't read the room and understand that red light cameras are bad. They're a thing of the past, and nobody wants to hear about red light cameras anymore. You're taking money from these people, and didn't we learn the first time? Come on, guys, let's be smarter than this.
Spoken like someone who's rolled way too past the line at a few stoplights.
Oh, don't even get me started, Drew.
No one wants to go through Oak Brook anymore with those red light cameras, so let's just settle
Well,
down.
and here's the thing. For our viewers and listeners, red light cams may not be a big issue in your community, but I got to tell you, in some areas of DuPage, and a lot of areas of the south suburbs, red light cameras are huge. They're a big issue, moves voters, moves the news. And here in Don Harmon's region, where there are some races in South Suburban Cook and Will, in the DuPage area, where there are some places Republicans can make gains, Don Harmon just opened up his Democratic members to potential hits on this in the ballot box or in the mailboxes by taking $5,000 when he has millions and millions. Why the heck would you do this? It's a political error. And let me read the quote from the Chicago Sun-Times editorial board, not the Tribune, not the Daily Herald, not Illinois Review or anybody else. It's the Chicago Sun-Times that said, backing ban on red light cameras, campaign cash, then taking the money is just hypocrisy. I mean, again, when even they're calling you out, you probably screwed up. Yeah, all right. Let's stick on hypocrisy because we've been talking about Pritzker's hypocrisy for a long time on this show. And for the first time, he was a little bit called out, and I was very excited to see this because just in the last week, J.B. Pritzker went to a national conference for the Center for American Progress and spent his entire speech talking about how we need to work together with the other side.
Oh, really?
I'm in favor of that message, except I don't think this messenger is the one to do it because J.B. Pritzker is the king of partisanship and ripping on Republicans every chance he gets. And what is kind of hilarious is within hours of him giving that speech, a fundraising email came out from the DNC where Pritzker was the one who it came from, where he said, GOP radicals are working night and day to enact an extremist Republican agenda. So within hours of him saying we should tone down the partisanship and actually work together, an email comes from him raising money for the DNC, doing the exact opposite. And the Chicago Tribune called him out for it. And I was excited to see that finally somebody is maybe a little bit calling out Pritzker for his hypocrisy. So I was just excited to see this. You probably can't touch this because you got to do work with the governor's office. I get it. But I'm just curious from your side on the political team, seeing Pritzker finally maybe get a little bit of pushback on him pretending to be bipartisan when he's the least bipartisan person on the planet. It was kind of nice to see.
Does this feel like justice for you?
I mean, it's one mention, so I'd like to see a little bit more.
It's just
but it's finally a mention.
It's just hilarious to me. Like, how can you go on stage and say that and feel good about it? Like, he's still blaming Rauner for things, and Rauner hasn't been in office for how long now? It's just ridiculous.
Well, in the governor's defense, Rauner was god awful, terrible. So we don't.
Well, but you can't use it anymore. It's I don't understand why we're using something that happened 6 years ago for something that's a problem
Rauner
right now.
Rauner was that bad.
So Rauner's employees stole all the PPP money?
No, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
I'm not going to step in because Oliver's winning this argument. And it's kind of fun for me. So
Wow. Clip that one.
that's kind of exciting.
Flip that one.
All right, let's end with this topic because our batteries are starting to run low and we're over time. But we're going to end with this. And I'd be curious of everybody's thoughts. So for a long time, Kim Foxx was the foil for suburban Republicans. You could tie your opponent to Kim Foxx, and it was a big help to you. And for a lot of people who were used to just using the Madigan strategy, it was a natural flow over to let's just use Kim Foxx instead. Obviously now with Kim Foxx not running again, that we don't have that opportunity as much as every day passes, it looks like based on some recent polling that Brandon Johnson may be starting to step into that role. We talked about when Johnson won as mayor of Chicago, because he's such an extreme far left progressive, he would start to give us opportunities as Chicago, Cook County, and suburban Republicans to tie people to Brandon Johnson and his policies. Well, in a recent poll that was done on something completely unrelated, they tested some of the politicians and their favorability, and we saw what Brandon Johnson's favorability is in Cook County, and it's already getting pretty bad. In West and South Cook County, his favorables were 26 and his unfavorables were 41, so he's 15 points underwater. In Northern Cook County, his favorables are only 18 and his unfavorables are already a whopping 45, which is 27 points underwater already. And if you look at in all of Cook County, Johnson's underwater 27 points with independents. He's underwater, he's barely above water with Democrats in Cook County. It's only +7 even with Democrats. And so what we're seeing is Johnson's been in office for 7 minutes, and already you're seeing an opening here where his policies and his politics and him himself are not playing with Cook County voters, with suburban voters. It looks like the more Johnson pursues his agenda, he's going to open himself up to being that foil for suburban Republicans to tie their opponents to Brandon Johnson and his far left progressive agenda. So you're starting to see this already, and we predicted this happening. And so I'm just curious what you guys saw in that poll about how Brandon Johnson's unfavorables are already starting to shoot through the roof.
This is a gift. I think with Lori Lightfoot not getting reelected, and then Kim Foxx heading out the door, they were kind of our two biggest, boogeymen that we would use in these situations when we were trying to call out, progressive Democrat policies. And now Brandon Johnson shows up and he's doing all these things, and you're like, as a Republican, you gotta be thinking, yes, like here, here's that next, opening for us to start messaging on this. So it's exciting. We'll see if we take advantage of it. We don't always do a great job on the execution on our side, but fingers crossed.
Yeah, I get it. Republicans can definitely utilize this. Some weeks you get happy, Matt. Some weeks you get cynical, Matt. Today you get it's too far from election day, Matt, and a lot can change. We don't know, especially in the mayor's.
You think Brandon Johnson's numbers are going to improve with independents and suburban voters?
I don't think they'll improve, but I don't know how much that's going to actually play in places like Lake County or DuPage County or McHenry County. And also, when you look at the mayor's race, just this last cycle, they got rid of Lori Lightfoot. Everyone hated her, and they got someone who's even worse. So is this going to change much in Chicago or in the areas where it matters? I don't know. You get rid of him, and you just put someone else equally bad in.
Well, I'll tell you, when you border Cook County, the main thing is retail theft, and these people coming from Chicago into our county and committing crimes. So this is absolutely an issue that will continue to play. And if he doesn't do anything about it and decides maybe I'll just sue car manufacturers instead of putting criminals in jail, it's going to continue to be an issue. I don't see it getting
Watch
better.
your hands, Chris. I agree. The main thing is that unfavorability, and are people going to really latch onto Brandon Johnson as a mythological figure as much as they are other issues, as much as they are Joe Biden? I don't know. I don't think so. Just seeing at recent political trends, we'll see. Republicans should use him as that figure to point to, but is it going to change many hearts and minds? I don't know.
So there's a couple points I want to make on this issue. First, I'll piggyback off DeRay a little bit, and I half agree with what you're saying in that I don't think Johnson will ever be as strong of a boogeyman as Kim Foxx, because, she was bad. She's terrible. And as somebody who lives in Cook County, I can attest to that. So I don't know if Johnson will ever get to that level, just because I don't think he's that much of a boogeyman figure. But I do think there are a number of things you can tie Brandon Johnson to, and there's a lot of reasons. There's one big reason for why Johnson's approval ratings in the tubes right now. Because in reality, Johnson surprised people on a number of things. He's done some things that have actually been better than expected. But there's one thing he's done terribly. And there's one thing and why I think these approval numbers are in the tubes. It's a migrant crisis. And if this migrant crisis doesn't get any better, be it in the city of Chicago, be it in Cook County, be it anywhere, because we're already seeing it in Will County, it might get to that point where he is a big enough boogeyman to really matter, because the migrant crisis has no end in sight. There's double-digit bus loads a day. We can't afford to take care of these people. So if Johnson continues to drop the ball on the migrant issue, then yes, he can be that boogeyman for Republicans to use.
Well, especially as we've talked about in recent weeks, how immigration is popping up more and more as an issue in what voters care about right now. It's jumping up the list of voters' issues that they care about. You need a boogeyman to go with that. And with Biden saying build the wall, I don't know if Biden is really that tough boogeyman on immigration. Maybe Johnson steps into that and becomes the foil on immigration, where people talk about how immigration is a big problem. Johnson's made it worse. And we understand that illegal immigration is not the migrant crisis. We get it. But voters don't do nuance, all right? We all know it. Voters don't do nuance. And if they're unhappy about immigration and they see this big problem with the migrant crisis, and the migrant crisis is starting to seep out into some of these suburban areas, they're not going to differentiate between legal migrants and illegal immigrants. They're just going to hold all the politicians accountable, and now you have a foil in Johnson. And so it looks like this very well could be that opening, and November is long enough away where this thing can keep building and building.
So the thing about Johnson, and I've talked to him, met him a few times, very good speaker. He believes in what he believes. So from a standpoint of if I'm working with somebody, I like that. I might disagree with you, but if I know I can trust that where you're going to be is where you're going to be, that's great in my opinion. And he believes in what he believes, whether we disagree with it or not. So in the poll that you're looking at, and I haven't looked at it, where are the numbers? Where are these numbers coming from that are pulling him down? Republicans are already going to be against him. I think he's losing from his base that are upset about these issues, and some of his problems that I've seen is communication. Yeah. He's not communicating well on what's going on. Now listen, it's a tragedy on the whole immigration process, and I don't want to get into that because we could be here another half hour. It's a federal issue, in my opinion. But anyways, that's where he's really, where do you change the numbers? Where do you say, okay, he's the problem, so come vote for us on this side? If we don't have ideas what the solution is, that's caring, that brings people, lifts people up, there's nowhere for them to go. Right. And that's the issue.
And that's why what really stuck out to me was being down underwater 27 points with independents, only being up by 7 with even Democrats. Like, it shows me there's a lot of weakness there even on the left side where you can use him as a foil. Sure. Not for, you could whip up your Republican base for fundraising, but this is becoming now, like Kim Foxx and Laura Lightfoot, they started off as just fundraising. Let's use them as our foils in our fundraising emails and texts to raise a few bucks. And then it became things that actually moved voters because independents were so angry. You're starting to see that here where 27 points underwater with independents, and it's his first year. I mean, it's not even a full year yet. Yeah, but if those numbers keep going through next November, you could see it be something that could move swing voters.
But you have to be able to tie his disapproval to a candidate and their same policies. And what policies are you going to put forth that's going to fix the problem? Yeah. If you can't do that, I don't know what happens.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
It's a good place to close. We're over our time. Thank you to Ed Sullivan for joining us today, bringing his expertise.
Enjoy.
He will give us, after the second week of veto session, we'll get a download from Meta on what happened so we can share it with you 2 weeks from now on our SFR episode. So thank you to Ed. Thanks to our political team. Obviously, Matt, Chris, and Abby were here. Michael is forever away down in Southern Illinois, so we didn't beg him to drive up here for this one today. Thanks to Rich Carter for joining us. Thanks to Lane Davis, our producer. Ryan Kilduff, who is the assistant intern producer for the day, working for Lane. Thank you to our watchers and our listeners. Please like and subscribe. We'll be back to you next week with even more political updates. We didn't get into a lot of stuff. Jim Durkin's looking at running for state's attorney, and he's polling for it. Kelly Burke is retiring. There's new candidates jumping in races. There's big Democratic primaries that are going to split Democrats in suburban Cook County and in Cook County. We got a lot to talk about, so next week, don't miss it. We'll be back in your inboxes in 1 week's time.